Hello and welcome, everybody. Guess you'll be listening to this on YouTube a little after the event, but people joining us all the time. Welcome to Crossy's Corner, and I have with me the incredible Cath Bishop, who has joined me. Hey, hello, Cath. Who has joined me to talk about her life in sport and, amongst other things, life in business, life in the Foreign Office, but particularly all of these things have coalesced into this amazing new book that you've written, Cath, The Long Win, which has just recently been published in the UK and is going to be published in the States, I think, is it next week?
That's right, yeah.
And I kind of want to have a look at how the book, how the genesis of the book came about, and reactions you've had to it, and where you think it will take various worlds. You talk about the worlds of sport, the worlds of business, the worlds of education. So first of all, could you tell us a bit about yourself? Because I kind of know you mostly as a role. I know about your other work, but just introduce yourself to people perhaps who might not know you that well.
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on to Crossy's Corner. Very, very happy to be here. I'm going to have to take a photo in a minute just to prove I was on Crossy's Corner, because it's a thing, it's a thing. So yes, we know each other from the days of rowing. I was in the team and went to Atlanta, Sydney and Athens, and retired in Athens. I then worked in the Foreign Office as a diplomat for 12 years. So it slightly overlapped my time in the team. And, I focused quite a lot in that time on issues around conflicts, post-conflict, pre-conflict, during conflict, worked in Bosnia and Iraq, and I had a really kind of, fascinating time. And then in the last sort of 7 years or so, I've been working in leadership development, a range of things, teaching at business schools, and looking at this question of performance, teams, having had two quite extreme experiences of those things. And I guess the book is sort of, making sense of all of that.
People, it's often said sometimes people have got a book in them and it's just struggling to come out. I mean, how much of a realization was it that you had a book in there, and how much of a struggle was it to get it out?
Yeah, it's a great phrase. I totally connect with that. I think I had about 10 books swirling around my head for about the last 10 years. So it's taken quite a while. I think I looked up sort of the other day that I first started writing out the concept of this book in 2017. So it's been about 3 years, but I had ideas still in my head before that, but hadn't really gotten down. So it's been a sort of on-off process since then, and it's taken lots of different forms. And I think there were different parts of the process, because there's a personal element to making sense of my experiences of winning. I mean, the book is about this topic of winning. What do we think success is really about? So I kind of had to work through some of my own experiences, write some of those down and not put those in the book, but just to sort of get my own making sense process going. And then sort of start layering on, if you like, how I saw this from different perspectives of my own, in diplomacy, in business today, as a parent as well. And then to sort of step back and go, hang on, what's the rest of the world say about this? So, a few people that I spoke to and chose to kind of interview, and also what's the research telling us about motivation, about performance, about leadership? Where does this all sort of come together? So it's a multi-layered process.
Yes, it's really like you've woven in all the threads of your life to make a kind of real sort of an intense tapestry with this book that kind of covers almost every aspect of what you do and what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that goes across our lives if you look at that broader perspective. So, this concept of, success and winning is very prevalent in education, business, sport and politics. And, and I've experienced each of those areas as well. So, again, it was that personal, professional link and then the broader view. And so actually, as I wrote it, the more interwoven it became, and that gave me confidence to keep going. And, in fact, my publisher sort of had to kind of say stop, because, I could have kept going and could have kept going. And there was, some really interesting stuff I was getting into about how, the Chinese have these 50-year plans, and it gives them a whole different perspective on life, on politics, on government. So anyway, I'm off again. As you can see, that it's a rich area, and actually part of it was then thinking about how do you organize this in a way that other people can connect with it too, and maybe challenge some of those ingrained myths that are still very prevalent and I think a bit outdated now, a bit old-fashioned, about what winning's about.
So we can talk about this concept of the long win and the short win. Let's before we get into that. We texted earlier today, and I said one of the things we might talk about was Donald Trump and this notion of the long win and the short win, and what Donald Trump's attitude shows about the US election. What do you make of that?
Yeah, my God, it's a roller coaster watching it from afar. I can't believe, I can't imagine what people over there have experienced going through this. But he is the perfect exemplar of somebody who lives by and preaches this binary concept of winning. You're either a winner or a loser. There's nothing in between. Basically, winning is good, losing is bad. I mean, it's very shallow, it's very narrow, but it's a rhetoric it's much used. I mean, in this country, our Prime Minister wants to beat the virus, literally talked about wrestling it onto the ground a few months ago, which I think is a nonsense. That's not a sensible way in which we as a society can collaborate and work, through our communities to manage this. It's so much a more complex issue. But yeah, Trump talks winning all the time. And of course, now he's faced with how he spins that narrative around losing.
Thinking about, British rowing has been very much, in terms of the public focus, has been around winning medals and winning gold medals in particular. And winning has been part of, the internal fabric of British rowing. And one can think of athletes like Redgrave and Pinston and Granger and so on, and further back itself. When you look at rowing, where do you see it as a sport with this focus on these big figures that particularly like Stephen, let's say, and even Matthew? I think Matthew's publishers in his book, they asked him to write a chapter on losing, and he said, I said to Matthew, what was the hardest chapter to write? And he kind of said the one on losing, because he didn't really do losing, or so that was the focus. So what do you make of these sort of big titanic figures in rowing and where they sit on winning and losing and the long win?
So yeah, I have absolute admiration for these figures who achieved far more than I did, and were hugely inspirational to me to know, and still are. And I think they have been brilliant at exploring the possibilities and the boundaries of what's physically possible. But I suppose I see the team as more than just those giants, because it is more than just those giants. And I guess that's a little bit of what I want us to think about. The other stories, that all of the other people there who were very necessary to push us to win the medals that we won. And I sort of care about the experience that everyone has, if you like, in that environment. I think, it can be a really tough gig being a spare, being at trials and not quite make it, being that spare pair that pushes the pair to win the medals. And I am so grateful to the people that I trained with, who nobody remembers now, who nobody cites, who weren't legends, but who had a massive impact on my career and just my development as a person beyond being a rower. And I sometimes feel that we've got the proportions wrong. Not that I don't want to celebrate those gold medals. They are brilliant. And in themselves, they speak for themselves. And I don't know why we can't sort of acknowledge the broader team that we are all part of. And actually, I think there are sort of performance gains to be had from enabling everyone to thrive in our environment. So aiming for that much more.
You write quite powerfully in your book about the difference between sort of high achievers in the rowing squad. I think you talk about the tickets being handed out at an airport for people that have come back with medals and people that, hadn't come back with medals. And then there's the notion of, the gold medalists being in the front of the plane in first class, flying back by BA, and the rest of them sort of going out the back steps with no fanfare or publicity, and the winners or the gold medalists coming out the front to all the press looking at them. Is that something that you still see as a prevalent attitude in rowing today, or is that something that was more rooted in a past era?
I mean, I think the specific example of tickets handing out doesn't happen like that anymore. And I'm really, really glad it doesn't happen like that anymore. Now, I mean, I suppose one of the reasons that I felt able to write about this and to give some of those examples is because I have seen it both sides. I did kind of later in my career get my ticket handed out first, but I never forgot what it was like to be left standing there already feeling rubbish about having lost the race, but then kind of somehow almost feeling you weren't, you were of less value because of that result. And that had a deep experience on me. And I think having seen it from both angles, I kind of feel that it's important not to forget both of those experiences existed. That particular case doesn't happen anymore, but I think there are probably still elements of that kind of culture that exists, not just in rowing either. I think we've had this desire to win medals become something that goes beyond performance in terms of defining our value as people. And that's where it's gone a little awry. I think the experiment we've done for 20 years has shown, way more than people thought was possible. And there is much to celebrate there. But as with any kind of performance approach, we need to go what's worked, what hasn't worked as well. And I think there are some elements there around this kind of valuing of people within those high performance environments, and rowing is one of them, where I think we've kind of lost track of the values, if you like, that we should have, the way we should look after people, not just treat them as a medal machine. And we see that language coming out a lot, that people are talked of not as, Martin and Cath, but, he's a nailed on medal potential. She's got some podium potential in the next 4 years, all of that dehumanizing stuff. I mean, I was really struck when Tom Ransley retired. He wrote a piece, very powerful piece, on the BBC Sport website in an interview, I think in the Telegraph as well, about a really dehumanized experience of sitting on the start line at Rio. I've found quite stark, quite shocking to read. That's not really for me, a picture of success. And that's where I think we need to define a bit more, what does success look like? And are there unacceptable levels of success? Doping is one, abuse is another. GB Gymnastics is showing us some unacceptable stories of success where people would rather give a medal back, if that meant they could change the experience they had. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to kind of explore that area more about, do you know what, there are going to be some really, really tough moments here. I'm absolutely not for making it kind of easy, but that doesn't mean that we can't value people.
I can see, in terms of business about the winning attitude, that it's kind of always been there. Do you think there's a reason why such stories now are coming out in sport? You mentioned GB Gymnastics. I think we talked earlier about cycling that's had its own problems. Rowing too, not immune from those issues in terms of the culture around the training base in Caversham. Do you think there's a reason why these stories are coming out now, particularly about a culture where winning is everything, and therefore the care for the individual, the holistic sort of nature and the experience and the fun are kind of sidelined?
Yeah, I think all of these things happen when there's a combination of factors that enable it. Suddenly there's a catalyst and we see things differently. So I don't know that it's one thing. Firstly, we've got a space to discuss it this summer because we're not being bombarded with the stories of the Olympics and the Paralympics and the football tournaments and all of that. So we've actually had a bit of space to step back. I think Athlete A as a film, as a documentary, was immensely powerful. And that really resonated, internationally within gymnastics, but beyond as well. And I think, it's just one of those moments where suddenly somebody has, in words and pictures, shown something that unbelievable amount of people knew was going on, and suddenly said, look, this isn't okay. And that in itself, it's that, new emperor's clothes moment, isn't it? Where you kind of know it isn't all right, but nobody's actually said it. So you have those watershed moments, and I think we've had the space to deal with it. And I think there's a generational thing. I think we've got, that kind of period where, you see this in business as in sport, our generation were willing to put up with certain things. And then actually, as we've got older, we potentially looked back and gone, do you know what? I'm not happy for the next generation to go through this, or the next generation themselves arrive with, a kind of deeper sense of how things should be in the future. So there's a bit of an evolution, I think, happening as well. And I guess it's that, breathing, taking stock of how we've gone on this kind of incredible UK sport funded adventure experiment. So I think there's a combination of factors.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think you're absolutely right about that. In terms of what more is possible, what about just giving us a shape of what winning in the long term looks like from your perspective, and why it's different from winning in the short term? I know that's the first part of your book, where you talk about defining winning in the short term and what its cost has been.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have three themes. I mean, what I tried to do is not be too formulaic about it, because I think the whole part is actually we should be all defining success for ourselves. And that's a whole conversation that I don't think we ever had. It was imposed, you're here to win a gold medal, and that was it. And although, yes, I still want us to strive for excellence, to go faster than anyone's gone before, I'm absolutely not against that. It's important for us to layer on this sense of, why do we want to win a gold medal? What's that going to show? What's that about? What's that proving? Why do we need to do it? Why do we deserve to do it? What's the responsibility that comes with that, should we achieve that? And so it's broadening that discussion, I guess. So the first piece is clarity of broader success criteria, the meaning underneath the medal. I was really struck, for a while, and actually initially one of my ideas was to kind of write a book about silver medalists, because there's all this research about how silver medalists are the least happy on the podium. Yeah. Because the gold medalists are very happy, but the bronze medalists are really happy. So it's not just a ranking thing. And actually, it's not to do with the colour of the medal. It's to do with your expectations and your comparison points. So your bronze medalist looks at fourth place and goes, my God, I'm glad I'm not fourth. I'm really celebrating being here. And the silver medalist looks upwards and thinks, oh no, I'm kind of one step off this. And it's in the process initially of thinking, was this my torment, from Athens kind of thing that I've taken with me. But what struck me was the number of stories that I came across, and that we've all heard publicly, of winners feeling empty at the podium or a moment after the podium, of winners saying they felt depressed, of winners then saying, what is this it? And there was recently a brilliant cricket documentary about the English cricket team when they became number one. It was called The Edge. I don't know if you saw that. It was really great. And for me, that's showing the true picture of success. So we can look at the highs and the lows and think, do we want to do this next time, or should we try and do this slightly differently? So for me, that was a great kind of exemplar, again, of, let's look at the full picture of success, not some kind of rose-tinted image of what we see on the podium. So seeing all these gold medalists kind of feeling like this, I see this is madness, that moment has become disconnected from anything that comes thereafter or that went before. And so I think when we hunt for the medal, but the medal doesn't have a meaning beyond that moment, that's when you crash afterwards. So for me, it's about clarifying, what does that medal mean to you? What is it going to mean for the rest of your life? And also, what are you going to gain on this journey if you don't get the medal? That's a really important question, because, well, in 2020, nobody's going to get a medal because the pandemic has wiped out the Olympics this year. So if you've got nothing else on your agenda, then you crash. And of the athletes I've spoken to in rowing, but also beyond that, that's what's happened. The ones who struggled most for motivation were the ones who were most kind of solely medal focused. And the ones who've been able to adapt are those who are going, well, my sporting journey is also about this. It's also about this, or this gives me time now to think about something else, or to plan another part of my life, or to actually improve an element of my physiology that I've never really had time to take out from the program and do. So it enables us to be much more kind of adaptable. And I think we have this post-Olympic blues thing that seems to be almost, people expect now, oh, that's what happens. Well, that's what happens when you define success so narrowly. It doesn't need to happen. So clarity is the first one, clarity of purpose, of meaning of this sporting journey. The second one is a constant learning mindset, whereby, again, we are really focusing on our kind of daily gains, on the improvement process, rather than purely on outcomes. And this is how we think in sport now. For me, this is what helped me in my third Olympics. That, in the first two, it was all about, you got to win. Are you here to win? Are you tough enough to win? If you got a will to win, it was all that kind of really macho stuff, time and time again. It didn't make me go any faster. It just sort of tied me up in knots, wondering if, well, maybe I didn't have the will to win because I don't seem to be winning. And, it's only when kind of Chris Shamrock really helped bring this sort of performance thinking, whereby you're responsible for the performance, you can't control the result. We still want the results. That hasn't changed. But you know what? Looking at them, wanting them, thinking about them, that's not going to get you faster. Start focusing on the performance, all the things you can bring, all the things you can really improve on a daily basis. So if you become world-class at improving, you've got the best chances of getting the best results possible. That helped me enormously to have the success I had at the end of my career. And that's something I've taken on afterwards. But it's a challenge, it's a challenge to see that in, again, a lot of the work I do with business teams, they start looking at results. Everything determines, do we hit the quarterly figures or not? That determines whether we're good or bad. Madness. And meantime, you're not improving how you work as a team. So at some point, those results tail off. So again, so that's something I use quite a lot in my work, is this sort of real separation out, if you like, that and again, in 2020, when I've worked with various teams who are saying, it's a write-off. We've lost, we won't hit our targets, our profit margins. So 2020 is a waste of time. Then we have to go through this process of actually thinking, well, no, what can you gain from this year? Would have been much better if actually in January you'd had broader success criteria and not solely focus everything on the results. Because now I have to say, what can you take? Because those are the things that are going to help you to get back on track in 2021 and get the results eventually back on stream, or adapt and get the results in a different way. So it's all about this focus on experimenting, innovating, adapting, that in itself, we should see that as a part of success. We should recognize and reward that. Even if it doesn't immediately or every time give you results, it gives you the resilience over the long term to maximize the results you can get. And the last part is connection. So the relationships piece. None of us can succeed on our own. So actually, let's prioritize that rather than be sort of bogged down by lists of tasks and sort of become machine-like in the way we work. Actually, one of the things I loved about kind of rowing and I loved about the diplomatic work were they were both worlds that were really relationship-based. Actually, I think most of our worlds are. But let's prioritize that. Let's really understand that. Let's kind of build deeper relationships, not transactional relationships. Let's understand each other. Let's harness the different perspectives, have those really difficult conversations, and stretch ourselves through actually kind of working with people around us in a much more effective way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Those three principles are sort of threads that run through your book. I'm just thinking in terms of your experience in Olympics. You were in Atlanta and then you went to Sydney, which I know wasn't a particularly good experience. I think the squad then. How would you describe, where those three principles fitted in terms of the culture of British rowing then when you were in the Sydney Olympics? I think you were in a pair with Dot Blackie that came on.
Yeah. So I would say none of those were very present in the first two Olympics. There were pockets for sure, but not as guiding principles. They happened where they happened because individuals went out of their way to behave a little bit differently. But they would have been seen as soft. It was a very much a kind of, just that sort of macho thing, really. There was a lot of, when I look back now, I came into sport quite late. I learned to row at Cambridge. And when I got in the team, I was like, my God, this is a journey I never thought I'd be on. And I'm not qualified for this. I need to listen. I need to learn about what's required to do well here. And all I heard was, and I really tried for years to get my head around all of this sort of aggression, being tough, the will to win, pain. Don't give an inch to anyone, don't respect your opposition, all of these sorts of quite negative, quite fear-based phrases around, what are the other things that we used to sort of say, you don't have any fun. Joy will come when you get to the top of the podium. Don't think you're going to have any fun along the way. Not if you want to be a winner. And if you lose, my God, don't be happy, because then that means you're not a future winner. And I bought into this. And I'm so cross with myself now that I did. But it's what I saw around me. So I became, grief-stricken when we lost. We lost a lot, so I was unhappy a lot. And I used to sort of hound people around me if they weren't miserable enough over the fact that we'd done really badly, which is madness. But, that's what I felt was the lessons. That's what I could see, the language that was being used from, again, a whole variety of coaches. Of course, there were exceptions here and there, but that was the dominant messages I was getting. So I tried to drink that Kool-Aid, and it did me no good at all. and it wasn't fun. And I didn't get on the top step of the podium, so I didn't get that kind of moment of fun. But that's where it's so dangerous. I love what Johnny Wilkinson has been saying in his interviews recently. That he kept saying, "Oh, the next win, the next cap, the next trophy that is going to make everything okay. That I'll be happy then." And in his words, the joy never came. Again, that's not what it's about. And I think it's a really difficult message, an unhelpful message for kids who are looking up to sporting role models, to this sense that you can't have kind of fun along the way, and that you can only have fun if you win. And oh my God, we're all going to lose in life. Yeah. And therefore, actually, we need to be helping that experience, not stigmatizing that experience. It was really stigmatized to lose in those early days.
It's really interesting. I mean, I'm thinking of people in the squad, that I know a little bit about. I think you might have mentioned this, John Collins, in his interview, I think this Sky Sports, where he kind of broke down and he talked about, what it was like coming back from Rio without a medal. I'm thinking of Alex Partridge. Won a silver medal in 2008. And I think that is a sort of shining example of the fact that, they berated themselves for never going out for gold. And then probably, the 8 in 2012, they did go for gold and they led the Germans for a little bit. But even so, I think, overwhelmingly, maybe apart from Greg Searle in that 8, that there was this dissatisfaction that they somehow underperformed, because the whole rationale was, you're in the squad, you go for a gold medal, that's it. And so, I see parts of that culture still very much, as part of, maybe it's a British Ryan thing or Jurgen Grobler thing, still very much part of the system. What enabled you to do something different in terms of, you moved away after Sydney Olympics and then you came back. How were you able to find a different path?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. Do you know, one thing on that John Collins interview that it was really moving to watch. The interesting thing was, he said that result haunted him in ways he could never have foreseen. The interesting thing was afterwards, he almost felt he had to retract it, because it was sort of that, I remember in sort of things since, he was sort of like, well, I'm focused on Tokyo and I want to do better. It was almost like, he'd said something that I think resonated with many, many people.
Yeah.
And then it was almost like people didn't want him to kind of, that we don't want to show that side of things. And that's, again, in my book, what I want us to look at the underbelly of winning, as well as the glorious story. Life's complex. Again, that Edge documentary did that so well, the highs and the very real lows, the mental health struggles of those men in the cricket team is really powerful to watch. So anyway, coming back, partly it was stepping away. I had a year out, and that's when I started my job in the Foreign Office. So I limped on for a year after Sydney, but I was just had no kind of self-confidence. I was very sort of still struggling with the experience of that competition and also the lead up to it. And I couldn't find a different way of thinking. So I was just stuck, and I was stuck and I was a loser. And I literally, people were within earshot, sort of saying, she's been to 2 Olympics, it's not going to happen. It's predetermined now. I mean, that's pretty stark. That's pretty poor, isn't it? And so I thought, I've got to get out of here, because even though I love rowing, I'd love to do better, there's nothing around here that's going to help me get better at this point. So, that's when I thought, okay, fair enough. I've had an amazing time in exploring what's possible. I've done everything I could, but I need to do something different. And that's when I joined the Foreign Office, which is something I'd always wanted to do before I went on this kind of amazing rowing journey. And, that was like a breath of fresh air to me, to be in a different environment where I just spoken to in a different way, actually, and really respected. And I can remember early on kind of messing up on something we were sending to Parliament, some information, and my boss and his boss had been out at another meeting, and I'd sent something wrong, and some wrong information. So this was, I was only been in there a couple of months or something, and this document had gone to Parliament and it was wrong, and I felt, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm going to be sort of, on a spike on, in the Tower of London. And, and the boss and the boss's boss sort of called me in to kind of, said, oh, we need to talk about this. And I went in, I thought I was going to be sacked.
Yeah.
I was so used to kind of being bawled out if you do the wrong thing. And they were like, we're so sorry we weren't here on the day you had to fill that out. We feel terrible about that. There's no way you could have known this. And, this is the process that we have when, it's a really good point to learn though, because if we put something in that we realize is wrong, then there's a process for correcting that because we're human and we make mistakes. And so this is what we've got to do now to retract that and put the correct information in. I mean, God, I was so happy that day because I just had forgotten that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
And, so it just freed me up. I really enjoyed it. I also realised, there's some really big issues in the world that actually are bigger than a boat going backwards as fast as you can. And I know that may not appeal to many listeners of Crossy's Corner, but, it gave me massive perspective that was so helpful on the times I hadn't gone very fast in my boat kind of thing. So, at the same time I was actually doing some cross training. I was getting into running. I was really enjoying kind of working out. Some friends that I'd met previously in the track and field world. I was going to the track and seeing them on Saturday mornings and doing some sprinting. I was in great shape. I was doing PBs, half marathon, 10Ks. I was loving it. I was absolutely loving it. And that was kind of really interesting. And nobody was making me do that. And so, I don't know, about sort of 6 months in, I was still kind of in touch with people, particularly with Catherine. And I just started to think, I don't think I'm finished. I wonder, I just started to sort of daydream. Didn't say anything to anyone for quite a while. Is there a way back? Is there a different way? Could I do it? And it took me a lot of months to think about that. And then, kind of had a few sneaky outings on the lower Longridge stretch with Catherine in a pair.
Yeah.
Which, a friend of ours at Marlow Club sort of, set up the boat for us, and we managed to sort of sneak out, without going out from the main club. And thus the comeback sort of began really. Had a chat with Tomo, and he was very open, sort of non-committal. Obviously, you've got to come in the normal way.
Yeah.
But if you do that, he could see that I was in really good shape as well. I think I overtook him at the Reading Half Marathon. He steamed off, which we often joked about. I sort of came back, but in my mind, it had to be with a different mindset. And actually, Chris Shambrook, again, was part of conversations about how do you do it differently? And to come in going, do you know what? You could come 9th again. You've got to be ready for that this time. You could come 10th, you could come 11th, you could come 12th. And it was almost like that was not a conversation that one had with coaches. Chris allowed me a space to kind of help me to face this, because it was almost weakness to have that conversation. I think it would have been seen. It was somehow, we don't talk about that because we're here to win. But it's kind of like, do you know what? You've got to be ready for this. And he was like, what are the things that you can learn if you do? So it's for 2003, 2004. What can you take from rowing these 2 years in the squad? What can you try differently that's going to help you in your diplomatic career that you're going on to after Athens, come what may?
Yeah.
That's a great question on those days when you're at the bottom of the rankings going slowly. Do you know what? I'm still getting something that's going to help me. And I've got a life after. And so again, I might not get into the team at this point, and who knows if I do, where I'll come. But I just had all of those support mechanisms that enabled me to, really kind of savor the privilege of being back in the team and, control it a little bit more, I guess. I also worked for quite a long time because I didn't have lottery funding because I've been out for a year. So again, I got away. I got away in the middle of the day. I went and did work, and that was enormously helpful. Particularly for me, I think I just needed that kind of other life, other stuff to sort of give that sense of moving on in that part of my life as well.
One thing that occurred to me is then you were able to come back and change your mindset, and Chris, the sports psychologist, Chris Shambrook, was instrumental in helping you do that. What influence did you have? If you're coming with a different mindset or exploring it, did you have, say, on your partner, on Cath Granger, or indeed on others around you? Or was this something very personal?
It was quite personal, and I would say it was a work in progress. It was a struggle between the old mindset and the new mindset. So it definitely, Chris was kind of helping me with that balance, but because there was still so much around me that was still of that old mindset, and I got sucked into it, I'd been conditioned like we all had. So, it was a struggle. It definitely wasn't right now I'm the new business, that here I go. It was a kind of constant battle in my mind, I think, to try and get on top of it. But at least I kind of was striving to be in a different place, if you like. And I had a sense of, again, Chris would give me questions just to come back to, look, what are the things you've gained today? All of those kind of things. So, definitely he was enormously helpful in that. And, I didn't crack it, but I started long wind thinking, if you like. It was the start of me realizing there was a different approach that I have then ever since found myself, deepening and developing further in all of these different contexts.
One thing that occurred to me, I wanted to ask you, I think it was Jung that talks around sort of the stages of life that we go through, from the youth through to, the athlete and the warrior, and then going through the warrior to the sage. And I wondered how much you think it's part of a function of growing up, that you have this dualistic win-lose mentality, and how you have to go through that, like you said, and emerge into a different way of thinking in an experiential way? Or do you think it's possible, if you're in a culture and in an environment, if you're a young person, for example, and wanting to do sport, or talk about education, because I know that's another major theme. Do you think it's possible to do that from an early age without having to go through the win-lose conundrum?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've thought about it, and I continue to reflect on it. A couple of people have said, "Oh, you just got, just getting into sort of middle-aged reflections now. You've forgotten what it was like." I think we can accelerate the process. It has to be possible to do it differently. But I think the challenge is we don't encounter this until we get to the Middle Ages, or we have some kind of major life event maybe that forces us to think differently, because we're just not exposed to that broader perspective on what matters, the values, the sort of other qualities of being in an environment, whether it's compassion or mindfulness. These things just aren't present in most of our upbringings. So if you look at schools, we're still very much, we're totally assessed individually. And, we're never kind of assessed for our collaborative qualities, for our kindness, for our support for others, or our own sort of mindfulness and ability to kind of manage adversity. None of this stuff that is what, frankly, is most useful to you later in life is valued at that age. And I think, that's part of the kind of ongoing challenges of mental health that are growing. It's part of the sort of challenges I see in the leadership world, where, in organizations where they want people to collaborate more and be more adaptive and be more innovative, because that's what they need to survive. And nobody really knows how to do that. So I think in our formative years, we could be developing really different skills. And of course, a lot of what we put value on is what the authority figures tell us success is. And if it's top of the class getting A grades, well, of course, that's what we think it is. If we were assessed differently, and even came to the whole concept of assessment in a different way in itself, then I certainly think we would start prioritizing other things that we did, because we would be recognized and rewarded for doing so. So I think it's, I really get frustrated. My children are in primary school and it feels very Victorian, frankly. And I worry that they are being sort of developed for an era that is, long past, and not with the skills that they need for managing massive uncertainty, unpredictability, volatility in the world around us, when learning right answers and getting top marks is just not what it's about. Nobody has the right answer to the challenges we face. So why are we training people to be looking for the right answer?
Yeah, and I know you write about education in there's a whole chapter on education system, and this idea of the long win, and you're talking very eloquently now about what the long win would be in education. I think as a teacher, it certainly made me think about, you know, me and my classes, and certainly in the schools, the world of league tables. You know, and I guess your vision would be of quite a different sort of education system.
It would, yes, very different. I think some of the models, some of the ideas that I think are working well, if we look in the oh so wonderfully progressive Nordic countries, where they have so much more collaborative project work, peer learning. There's a whole body of theory around cooperative learning that is proven to be such a richer experience in so many levels. You know, it's not just about knowledge acquisition, it's about, you know, the application of that knowledge, the sharing of that knowledge, the stretching of that knowledge. And Alfie Kohn, Kohn, is somebody whose books I've kind of really loved reading and felt really eye-opening to me, who's a US academic who does a lot of work to bring a more of a cooperative learning approach into the classroom. So those are kind of ideas that in my mind just make sense because of what I see in the business world, because of those are exactly the skills that are needed and are where teams fall down at the moment, because they just don't really understand how to work with others. And, you know, how to be, you know, how to have kind of very adult to adult conversations that aren't hierarchically driven, where, you know, you can experiment and get things wrong and you are supporting and challenging each other, which, you know, can be really difficult to develop in organizations where we're still very much in sort of, you know, often adult child conversations and power driven, and it's all about ego and, you know, proving who's the best, rather than improving what we're doing as a company.
Yeah, you mentioned there one author that, and the one thing that strikes me about the book is you've read very, very widely. You know, you're really across all the literature, and you've also interviewed many different people. You know, like Matthew Syed. I know you've talked to him, and you know you've mentioned how generous they were with their time. You really have got a broad appreciation in the Long Win of literature and trying to piece that together in your concept of the Long Win and how it would work.
I mean, I've loved that about doing the book. That's one thing that, for me, the book was a vehicle to develop my thinking and stretch it. And, you know, it's absolutely done that for me. I feel like it was as much about that process as it was about kind of the finished thing. I mean, to some extent, it's a never-ending, vast literature, so I don't feel I'm over it. I feel I'm constantly discovering more, but that's fine as well. The conversation goes on. This was really meant to be a sort of, you know, a starting point of, look, this is where we've got to, and these are some of the angles that I'm bringing in, but there are many more. But I think it was also to prove almost how prevalent it is in our lives, because I think sometimes people identify it in one part but don't kind of realize that it actually goes back to, you know, the games you played growing up, where it was all about winning and losing. You know, I found that fascinating. Some of Terry Orlick's research, a psychologist who looks at the games and the behaviors that they drive in us very early on, and how rare it is to have cooperative games, you know, whether it's Scrabble or Monopoly or you know, all of those things. And it's that, you know, we learn through games. So let's think about what we want children to learn with. So, you know, I found all of that just endlessly fascinating. And I think sometimes we can realize something, you know, in our own particular world, whether we're in sport now or, you know, in the workplace or teaching, it's hard to see it inside that world. But then when you sort of see it from a different angle, or how it's playing out somewhere else, you go, oh, I get how that's playing out, and now I can map it across onto mine. So I've always found that sort of looking from different perspectives really helpful to get me to see something that I'm quite stuck in at the moment. And that was one of my aims in the book, really, was to kind of say, look how prevalent this is as well. So this is not going to be easy to change, because it's everywhere. The language is everywhere. You know, I notice it so much now. If you walk into a tube station, which I don't do very much at the moment, but again, you know, the minute I walked in, you know, kind of a few weeks ago, there's an advert. It's all about winning. You know, the product is trying to be a winning product because we'll buy it if it's going to make us a winner. it's the same mentality that the dieting industry has. This is the one that's going to make you a winning whatever it is. This is the winning hair product. This is the winning, lunch product to eat or ingredient, all the time. So, we're being sold this language, but really we ought to be a bit more discerning, I think, about, really, do I want to win with my lunch? Do I need to win when I'm washing my hair? I think we really should be pushing back more.
Yeah, just made me think then, what would be the long win for your book, The Long Win? In other words, what does that look like for you?
Well, part of it's today, obviously, getting on Crossy's Corner. The invite did not come until I published a book, but that's something that people have said. The process of writing it stretched my thinking and made me, in the nicest way, took me to read different things that I then was like, oh my goodness, I just love that experience of another idea that kind of takes you in a different direction. And I think it is having this debate, I suppose, being able to provoke and challenge and help us to have some more courageous conversations about how we approach this topic. It's a very important one. Often, again, we just charge on with our work, with our training, whatever it is, without making assumptions about what success looks like. Well, let's not do that. And I think it's really the conversations. And the good answer is there isn't one outcome. It's a sort of a bit of an adventure. And actually, it's rather lovely in 2020 to have a kind of a project with positive momentum that's bringing me into contact with lots of people from different worlds who it's resonating with, or who want to kind of discuss the ideas in it.
How is it too early to say how receptive? I mean, I know actually probably not, because you talk about it in the book, but how receptive business leaders or the guys you talk to on away days or company days, how receptive are those kind of people to the ideas that you put in The Long Win?
I mean, it's difficult to say, because I probably also see the people who reach out to me who it resonates with. Yeah. So I probably have a biased perspective. I think it's chiming, and actually what I could never have foreseen is the context that it would be published in. So whilst I managed to weave through some mentions of the pandemic in as I was doing my final versions in March, kind of thing, actually a whole lot of people are reevaluating what matters in 2020 in a way that, on a scale that I could never have imagined. I think before it would have been picking them off, one at a time, and then there's just a limit to how many you're going to get to. Whereas suddenly a lot of people are reevaluating what success means, and have been forced to. So that has really opened up this topic enormously. And so again, that, I could never have predicted coming into this space, but it is a space that a lot of people are ready to have a conversation about. Before, it was very hypothetical. I would be saying to them, what else matters if you, besides your annual results, or besides this, what else are you gaining? Those sort of questions about that constant learning mindset, that performance piece, if you like, and it would all be very hypothetical. Now it's no longer hypothetical. You are not getting those results in 2020. And what are you gaining? What are you investing in, and what are you developing, and what are you recognizing and rewarding, and what's motivating you to find new ways and to adapt? So it's very real now.
Yeah, I've got a little quote here. Just thinking, going back a little bit to the world of sport. It's from Simon Morton, who's the UK Sports Chief Operating Officer. COO, I guess that's Chief Operating Officer. And he talks about, over a 12-year period, funding being shifted rather from every Olympiad to a longer range of, and he says, we aim to support the development of the person as well as the performer. And we will have ambition that athletes will leave the high performance system feeling richer for their experience, irrespective as to whether they have succeeded or not on the field of play. I mean, how much do you look around and see like-minded people, and what's your view on what UK sport is doing there with their funding?
So it's a step in the right direction for sure. The UK sports strategy is an indication that at that top level, things need to change, and I don't see that as a a binary, we were wrong, this is, it's just an evolution. It's learning, I hope, from this experience, from the things that have worked well and the things that have worked less well. So let's kind of create the vision going forward. What I think we need more of, if you like, is that sense of painting the picture of what sport could be, because I think the winning medals piece on its own is actually quite narrow. It's in a short period of time. Those are moments that then aren't connected to, they could be much more connected in terms of the impact that medal has on communities, society, different aspects. And I think one of the organisations I've been more involved with over the last year or so is the True Athlete Project. So anyone who's listening, look up their website. I absolutely love what they do. And Long When Thinking is completely aligned with their ethos. They are providing practical input, supporting through a global athlete mentoring program, but also to NGBs, workshops around the conversations that were absent in my experience of sport, around your values, around your identity beyond sport, around compassion in high performance, around mindfulness in competition and in training, and around social responsibility. You have a platform as an athlete. Now, it doesn't mean we all have to be like Marcus Rashford, brilliant though he is, but we have a platform, and that platform isn't just for showing kit, in my mind, for wearing the latest whatever who's sponsored you. And so those are areas that I think are really rich areas for athletes to explore, to enhance their sporting journey, give them that deeper meaning, and actually give them a deeper platform for which to perform. I don't see that as taking away from their performance. I think it's going to help retention of athletes, because I think one of the things that we're beginning to see, and again, one of the reasons why we are stopping and pausing and thinking again, is that athlete retention is an issue in the Olympic system. The attraction of the next generation is an issue. The pipelines are not that great in some areas, and we have to then think, that's telling us something, isn't it? So, I think there are lots of drivers, and UK sport are absolutely right to be thinking about what this looks like. The challenge is, we love measuring things in a medal table and we're obsessed with metrics. We need to define it, in a clearer but also a broader way. And that's going to be a kind of ongoing journey. For my mind, the stories athletes tell after they've competed are really important. It's almost my kind of top metric.
Yeah.
I don't care what colour medal you got. I want to know what story you tell about it. Because that's actually not related to the colour of the medal, and this goes the same if you didn't win a medal as well, because that matters to me. Actually, how are athletes leaving the sport? What's the story they tell publicly, or to their grassroots clubs, or to the next generation, or to their local schools, or to their children? That I think is a really powerful, qualitative metric of what matters about being successful in sport. And that piece after the medal is important to me. I sometimes think it's a bit like this kind of the analogy, if we climb Everest, not that I'm climbing Everest, but if one climbs Everest, more climbers fall on the way down than they do on the way up, because it's all about getting to the top. But really, that's climbing, that's mountaineering, it's tough sport, you die on the way down. And I kind of think that doesn't seem that smart to me. And we've kind of done that a little bit. We've shot for that because that was the obvious thing, the target. But actually, we've lost a few people afterwards on the way down. It doesn't need to happen. We need to change that.
Yeah, I was wondering about the stories, how much they've changed the stories you tell yourself about, I know you won a silver medal with Dot Blackie in 1998, and then which doesn't really form much part of the narrative of the book, but then your World Championship win with Cath in 2003 in Seville, which I'd forgotten actually about how much her back injury had sort of influenced that championship, and then the silver medal win in Athens, and there's this quite striking bit where it must be Gary Herbert's commentary. I'm guessing
it is.
Yeah, it's something like only a silver or something like that. It was a judgment immediately you crossed the line. I wonder how much the stories you tell about those medal successes have developed or changed, from when you experienced them to where you are now.
Yeah, I'm probably glad I couldn't hear that at the time. I think it's interesting because it's a perfect indication, it's a perfect example of that social external voice judging you, as you say. And it's a moment, isn't it? It's a second in time, and this judgment is formed without really understanding that kind of the much richer story. If you know, if I give talks, you know, I'm always, for me, it's about what happened before the medal and after the medal that are really the most interesting things, and which provide a perspective within which to see the medal. And the medal in itself doesn't tell you any of that. But the stuff that you could learn from, connect with, relate to, want to hear more about is the stuff either side. So, you know, again, yeah, that kind of media picture of what success looks like, you know, is certainly a powerful piece. Although I think the media are starting to shift because they are telling some of these stories of how, you know, I think the media have been very supportive of the gymnasts in the right way to kind of help some of those stories, and there are many more stories they haven't yet told because it's, you know, it's not the right time, or you know, the kind of athletes aren't ready yet. So I do think there are some responsible journalists out there as well who are really helpful on this issue. And so for me, it is always about trying to see it in that broader sense and not the narrow sense. I think, you know, that story, I mean, I use it to kind of bookend the book, the Athens big result, because it epitomizes the dilemma, if you like, the question, how do you make sense of it? And it was a question in my head walking away. I kind of had my own sort of immediate kind of way of thinking, look, you know, I came 9th last time. We'd had quite a hell of a week that week as well of challenges and a poor first heat. And, you know, do you know what? I'm going to become a diplomat within 3 weeks. I've got a medal, you know. I was so glad that experiment had been worth coming back. And I'd got a hell of a lot of other things beyond. You know, you don't carry the medal around, you know this. You carry the experiences that came, that created that. So, you know, it's something that people connect with as a story, but I always try and play with it a bit and challenge some of our assumptions and challenge some of expectations. And that's really what I kind of use it for in the book as well.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing when you take your medal around and you show people is what people that are looking at it project onto it. It's almost as if it's a sacred object, you know,
yeah,
and so on. And it's so the story there is almost the medal's an end in itself, as opposed to what it does represent.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, you know, particularly we're talking about in schools. I think I'll be really careful about the messaging here, and I feel quite uncomfortable at some of the sort of classic narratives of, you know, gold medalist turns up, you know, had a few challenges along the way, but got this. You know, that's the narrative. That's what I'm recommending to all of you. You know, everybody feels we should be inspired by this. I should feel that I can have some highs and lows, but I'll win. I'll come in the sense of I'll come first. And it just kind of doesn't really make sense to a hall of 400, 500 kids. So we're not all going to come first, and actually doesn't necessarily matter that we're going to come first. You know, it's sort of got to be much broader than that. So I am quite uncomfortable that we kind of repeat this quite shallow glory story that I don't think is helpful. In life isn't really like that.
Yeah, I've just put up a quote there from Peter Haining, the great lightweight rower.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, we both know very well, and his notion there. I kind of wanted just to touch on what's happening at Caversham now, because there was a new performance director came to Caversham, Brendan Purcell, and he, I think, very much felt maybe uneasy about this notion that the athletes seemed to be talking around about sacrificing part of their life for what they were doing for rowing. And there was a sense, I think, with him that he kind of wanted a different type of system. And then, you know, whether it was connected or not, I don't know. But Paul Thompson left the squad, the women's chief coach. And then there's been quite a lot of controversy or surprise that Jürgen Grobler was not allowed to carry on coaching, you know, as chief coach to Tokyo 2021. And I wonder how much that is, you see that as, you know, trying to move to a different type of system in Caversham, or how much the Caversham system that's produced all this success has actually done that despite not being so very good for the athletes and having the wrong notion of, not enough fun, not enough retention after Rio was very poor, certainly in the men's squad. So I wonder what you think around that, from the Caversham system, Cath.
I think it's a huge challenge that, the Caversham system, and actually quite a lot of our sports, have been set up without this kind of ability to kind of course correct as you go. It's kind of like it's the system. And this is, really happening in other sports as well as rowing. And now to kind of transition from that is quite a challenge, because it was actually quite inflexible. So it definitely achieved the medals. But now we kind of go, well, we want high performance, but we want to maybe explore different ways of approaching that. We want to explore it kind of over the longer term. We want to think about athlete retention that matters to us. If we are shifting our views in some of those areas, then the system needs to sort of change itself. And I think that's the kind of Brendan's challenge, if you like. That's the sort of the really difficult piece. But it's coming at a point when I think, as we are now seeing some of the costs of athlete retention and pipeline issues that are part of kind of what went before. And transition is difficult. I think what they're going through mirrors a lot of the other parts of the system, albeit at different stages. But I think there are similar things happening, cycling, and some sports are going to really go on a kind of going to take a long time to recover, like gymnastics, I think. So I guess it's about defining, for British rowing, to define what success means for the next 10 years, 12 years. And to consider what needs to change in order to achieve that. And I think that's what Brendan is now looking at. But again, it's really difficult to, encourage different behaviours when, these behaviours were working before, and for athletes as well to be part of, I think he wants much more of a kind of co-created path forward where the athletes have much more of a voice and take responsibility and can contribute to, their development. Whereas, I mean, there's no question in my mind, no one was intending that to happen. There was no pretense of that. The training program is here and you do it or you go. I mean, there was a wonderful clarity that comes with that, but not a lot of flexibility, and not, I think, that opportunity to move to a more sophisticated culture. But that is going to take time for sure. But I think if that, there are bigger gains to be made. There's a bigger prize, if you like, in terms of the athletes that will come out of, a kind of adjusted system. But we're in that adjusting phase at the moment.
Ian Weir, listening, watching on YouTube, he, I guess, looked at a broader picture of rowing clubs, schools or universities. I mean, that's his sense that it's built around competition and competing. How difficult is it to avoid the trap of creating a win-lose culture in those clubs?
It's a great question. And I think when we're in that kind of, when we've grown up with that, you feel there isn't another alternative. What I see, the True Athlete Project of creating environments in which we're still competing to be the best we can be. We're still trying to pursue excellence. We're still trying to go faster or higher or further than ever before. But we're actually doing it in a place where we're almost playing much more to a positive, intrinsic motivating system within us, rather than a fear of losing, a fear of, there was a lot of kind of language around fear, I would have said, in the early days of my career, in terms of, you're going to lose if you don't be a loser. It's hard not to be afraid of that, because it's depicted as such a bad thing. Whereas I think what they want to, what we want to get to is a different culture where we are valuing that progress, that learning, all of which fuels performance. But I think it is about, what we recognize, what we set up. The original meaning of competition, competere, is striving together. And this makes me come back to that. Not striving against everyone else, striving together. And I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about what we're doing. Within our clubs, we want all of the crews to improve as much as they can. So let's not make sure that we are doing well and we're quite glad that the veteran men are having a rough time, because that makes us look better. It doesn't make us look better. It's getting out of that kind of zero-sum game thinking, where actually, striving together to be better is a much better mindset than striving for me to be better than that person over there, or for me to be number one and you to be number two.
I was very struck. I think because it's something close to my heart, in terms of the way you look at your opposition, which is, you know, and the way to look at them is as partners in your own performance and necessary to your own performance. And you know, I remember I was involved in this TV show, The Other Boat Race, where it was Oxford celebs versus Cambridge celebs over a sort of shorter boat race course. And we were looking at the Cambridge crew training, and the guys from the Oxford said, we've got to learn to hate them. And I actually knew some of them quite well. And I said, no, we've actually got to really hope they do well, because, you know, if we hope they do well, that's a positive thing to do. And that's going to impact on our performance as well. And I was very struck by that in your book.
Yeah.
Almost
and that's that's definitely a kind of regret of mine, that I bought into that mindset and didn't see my opponents as helping me to get the best out of myself, because I think that would have been much more positive for my performance as well as my experience. It's something that obviously I counted in the boat race world when when I was the chair for kind of 5 years, up until a couple of years ago. We really shifted thinking on that. I worked really closely with Siobhan Cassidy to, you know, because we realised that for the good of the club, we need to make sure that we have to sustain the club in a losing year, and it's not possible for us to win every year. So actually, we, you know, also that first year that the Cambridge girls and the Oxford girls were going to be on the global stage of the boat race, the Cambridge team was up against Karen Davis in the Oxford team. So we kind of knew, like, I mean, they might sink, they might catch a crab, but otherwise they're going to win by a long way. So how do we have a positive experience? How do we make sure that our girls have their best performance and come away proud of it? So we put a lot of work into creating markers that they would know that absolutely needed to go the fastest they had ever gone on that boat race. And we had markers around speed, around rhythm, around rate, you know, all sorts of things, communication, a whole lot of things, to make sure that they weren't destroyed by that experience. And that's actually something then that we kind of continued thereafter, that our measure of success when we were on the committee, on the executive committee, was, you know, actually whether those athletes have had a positive experience that sets them up for life thereafter, not damaged by the stress and the trauma of potentially losing a boat race, or actually winning it but going through a really miserable time. They're under a lot of stress anyway, and we're asking an awful lot of them, and they're really pushed extremely hard. And I really felt that was a kind of positive shift that we were forced to do in that first year, and we realised, my God, this is gold dust, not going down this route. I mean, I don't think the women's teams ever went down the kind of the hate route to the same extent that I've heard it talked of in the men's teams. But I think that's so toxic, so unhelpful to performance, and actually unhelpful to the world within which you are operating, that that's not acceptable success for me. I want to close shortly, Cath. It's been fantastic. Peter Haining's asked another question. I don't know whether you feel able or qualified to talk about that. Briefly, but, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the details of the strategy, but I think you know, definitely all of our own clubs are kind of, you know, beacon in their community and could be reaching out far more. I think that's a challenge for our sport, that we kind of stay as a bit of a closed community. And I love all the kind of work that Fulham Reach Boat Club have been doing, and they've set up in a really kind of short space of time to bring a much more diverse group of kids, but also adults. You know, I love the program they've done with, you know, what is it, the kind of prisoners that Imogen Walsh and John McAvoy have done. I can't remember, it's got a great name and I've forgotten the name of the program now. To kind of bring, you know, a whole range of people into our sport. I think it's so transformative being on the water that actually we could be doing a hell of a lot to help with all of the kind of mental health challenges going on. So, you know, I'd love our clubs to be able to kind of create some headspace to think about who in the community would benefit by coming on the water. Now, of course, like at this particular moment of time, that's massively challenging. But for me, this is really, really important. And we all have a responsibility. And this is where I think we're so caught up in competing and winning, but we ignore that responsibility we have, which I think there's far greater gains to be made by bringing our sport to a wider audience, by bringing more people into the boathouse doors. That for me would be a much bigger win.
So, Cath, it's been a fantastic. I think we've done slightly more than scratch the surface of the book, but there's so much more in the book to experience. How is it available to people, and where should they look for it?
Anywhere you normally would buy a book, online, any shops. It can be ordered through any of your normal routes. You can go through hive.co.uk. You can nominate your local bookshop, thenewbookseller.org, of course, Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, you name it, they'll have it.
Any plans for an Audible version?
Yes, there are actually, and they've just been delayed by some sort of system processing within the company that do that. So it is coming. I can't quite tell you yet when. It hasn't been recorded yet, but it is coming.
That's very exciting. Cath Bishop, it's been an absolute pleasure for the last hour or so, listening and talking about your brilliant new book, The Long Run. I hope it's going to have a massive impact.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Brilliant chatting to you, Martin.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.